Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Moments That Matter, Creating Actionable Customer Journey Maps. My name is Alyssa Hansen, Marketing Manager at Intouch Insight. Today, we're joined by special guest and journey mapping expert, Jim Tincher of Heart of the Customer. Jim will be discussing how to drive action from your journey maps, the importance of involving your entire team in the process, and how it can be easy for anyone to get started with journey mapping when you focus on key touch points or moments that matter. We'll also hear from our Director of Marketing, Lindsay Sykes, who will share examples of how two Intouch customers measure and improve key touch points in their customer journey using journey map dashboards. Before we get started, I just want to remind you that this webinar will be recorded and sent to you via email. We will also make the webinar recording available in the resources section of our website. Throughout the webinar, I encourage you to drop your questions for Jim and Lindsay into the Q&A box, and we'll get to them during the question and answer period toward the end of the webinar. So before I hand it over to Jim, I'd like to briefly tell you a little bit about Intouch Insight. Our vision is perfect information instantly. We offer a complete portfolio of customer experience management products and services, including everything from our CX platform to mobile form software to mystery shopping services. At Intouch, we practice what we preach. We have a 97% customer retention rate, and we value our customer relationships the way we know you value yours. Our customers rave about our quick response times, our rapid feature development, and our no request is too big or too small attitude. So we're very excited to introduce today's presenter, Jim Tincher. With a lifelong passion for customer experience, Jim founded Heart of the Customer, a CX consultancy that specializes in the creation of custom journey maps. Their goal is to help companies of all sizes increase customer engagement. Before launching the company, Jim led customer engagement initiatives at Best Buy and United Health Group. Welcome, Jim. Thanks for leading the webinar. Over to you.
Thanks, Alyssa. Appreciate it. We'll talk about us here in a minute, but first I want to introduce you to Bob and Andrea. Bob and Andrea lead the customer experience team at the YMCA of the Greater Twin Cities. And they had a business problem. That is retention, one you likely can relate to. They were looking at how do they increase retention of their members. Without membership, there is no mission. And so they were really focused on what do we need to do to increase our already good retention rate. And they ran some quantitative research and found a strong relationship between specifically millennials and how much they visited their first month and ongoing retention. Now, once you know the answer, that makes sense, that if you don't visit much that first month, you're unlikely to see the value, and so you don't stay a member. But what the quantitative research didn't tell them is why people didn't come more often. Why would they sign up for the why and then not come very often that first month and eventually drop off? And so they turned to journey mapping, working with us to better understand what mattered for their members. And we'll use them as an example as we go throughout today. Now, a little bit about us at Heart of the Customer. We set the bar on journey mapping. You may have seen my title is Mapper in Chief. That tells you two things. First of all, we do a ton of journey mapping. It was 96% of our business last year. And secondly, that I'm the founder, so I get to choose my own title. And so, yes, it's Mapper in Chief. And in fact, if anybody out there has a teenage daughter and you're looking for a way to horrify that teenage daughter, I highly recommend getting a vanity license plate that says Journey Map, because that's what I did, and yes, it horrified her. But you can see here some of the books were mentioned in X, The Experience When Business Meets Design, Mapping Experiences. We also wrote 2 cover articles in Quirks magazine, and the one on the right actually featured the YMCA that we're talking about today. The YMCA is also one of 3 case studies we'll be talking about in our upcoming book, How Hard Is It to Be Your Customer? Using journey mapping to drive customer-focused change, coming out in April. You can see some of the nice press we've already gotten from some thought leaders in the industry. But that's enough about us. Let's go ahead and talk about you. Now, odds are, by spending 45 minutes of your time on this webcast, you're likely interested in journey mapping. Reasonable assumption, and you're not alone. In 2017, Forrester reported that 88% of customer experience professionals are mapping their customer's journey. The year before that, in their State of the CX Profession, the Temkin Group reported that 60% of CX professionals are increasing their journey mapping efforts. So if you're interested in journey mapping, know that you're not alone. There are a lot of people focused on this, and with good reason. Aberdeen looked at the impact of a customer journey management program. I'll talk about that distinction in a minute. And they found that those that were managing their journeys saw great improvements from everything from customer service costs, decreased sales time, improved marketing results, a lot of benefits when they manage the journey. Now, we talked in the title about creating actionable or action-oriented journey maps. This benefit only comes when you manage the journey. Journey mapping opens the door to this, but it requires action in order to make a difference. And that action really depends on your goal. And when I talk to somebody new about journey mapping, this is my first question to them, because I can predict how successful they'll be based on the answer to this question regarding why are you journey mapping? What's your goal? Is it to map your customer experience? Which is a rational answer. I'm doing a journey map to get a map of the journey. Makes sense. And a lot of people, that's their answer. And we won't work with them. The other option is to drive action from the results. And we talk to a lot of people whose only goal is to develop a map. And then it's no surprise when nothing happens in the back end. Now, that's just not me saying that nothing happens with journey mapping sometimes. We did a survey 2 years ago with customer experience representatives from throughout the world. And we asked them, how successful was your journey mapping initiative? Now, I think we've already established I'm a journey mapping geek. And so I thought when I put in the question about how successful your journey mapping initiative was, we'd be looking at who gave it a 4 versus a 5, because it's a really powerful tool when done right. But that's not what we discovered. In fact, what we found was that only 35% of participants in the survey gave it a 4 or a 5. Blew me away. 35% gave it a 1 to a 3. And as you know from your surveys, if somebody's giving you a 3, that's not a good score. And then 30 people said it's too soon to tell. But journey mapping done right costs anywhere from $80,000 to $150,000 to $300,000. I've heard of people spending more. You go to your boss and say, yeah, that $150,000 we spent on the journey mapping, I don't know if it worked or not. And that's not such a good conversation. So 2/3 essentially were unwilling to rate their journey mapping as successful. And why was that? Because nothing changed. 2/3 of the time, people are doing journey maps. They get a nice looking journey map, but nothing changed in the back end. I'm happy to say all of our customers who took part in the survey all gave it a 4 or a 5. They found action happened, but too much journey mapping is done in an intuitive way, which means that maps look beautiful, but nothing changes. And you can find this white paper on our website, Heart of the Customer. So we're going to ask you a poll here, our first poll, to predict, to see if you do a better job than I did of predicting what most matters for success. These are in alphabetical order. Was executive sponsorship, graphically designed or appealing maps, involving broad cross-functional teams, involving customers in the process, or selecting the right journey to map. And we'll give you a few seconds here to choose which one do you think is most impactful. Now, we actually asked 8 options, but the polling software only allows 5. So let's see what you think is the best. And again, see if you do better, because I got it wrong when I predicted what the answer would be. All right, let's see what the results are. Executive sponsorship, number one. That's what I predicted too. You probably guess that's not it. Involving customers in the process. That's in the top three. Third was involving broad cross-functional teams. And number four is select the right journey to map. Nobody selected beautiful maps, and that's good. That's a good thing that nobody chose that. Let's go ahead then, Alyssa, and let's look at going back to see what the real answer is according to our survey. That is number one, involving broad cross-functional teams. Now, once you know the answer, it probably makes sense. And we're going to talk about these. These three are some of the foundations between the best practices in creating a world-class journey mapping process. And those three are: customer experience is a team sport, so bring your whole team. Magic happens at the intersection of customers and employees. And lastly, you win or lose customers at those moments of truth. So let's start with best practice number one. Customer experience is a team sport. You need to bring the whole team. You saw in our survey, number one option is a broad cross-functional team. And again, once you know the answer, well, it makes sense because it's change management 101. Teams won't be part of the solution if they aren't part of the process. Let's say, for example, you do this journey mapping and you find the biggest problem is, I don't know, let's say it's your app. That you have an app for your restaurant, for your for your retailer, whatever it is, and your customers find that the app is just confusing. They don't know how to use it. That's a big frustration for them. But your digital team wasn't part of the journey mapping project. And you come to them and say, look, we've got this beautiful journey map. It talks about just how bad our app is. Can you please do better? Okay, you can probably predict that conversation doesn't go so well. But if they're part of the process, they'll be bought into the learning and are therefore much more likely to act. Our first conversations with a lot of companies, they tell us, we want to keep this journey mapping team small so we can be nimble and get the journey mapping done quickly. If your goal is to create a map, great idea. Fantastic. Keep the team small, get out there, get your journey map, get done. But if your goal is to create change, then you need to involve a broader team. And we asked people who was part of your team, we see they didn't do so well. Now, the primary people we interviewed were in customer experience. So no surprise, that's the group that was represented the most. Customer service is represented about 2/3 of the time as well. Marketing and operations, who are typically pretty foundational to your offerings, were only represented about 3 out of 5 times. Your field, who is the most important part often to actually delivering your results, only represented about half the time. And interestingly, market research and customer insights only about half the time as well. But what I wanted to say surprised me, but really didn't, are these bottom two. 70% of the time, your technology team is not invited to be part of journey mapping. But I don't think we've done a single journey map that didn't involve technology changes. And 93% of the time, HR is not involved. But every customer experience project is a culture project. Now, some HR teams are all about compliance. I don't want them either. But you have to give an eye towards how will we drive change. And that cultural part, the training, the internal communications are all part of driving the change. You want them involved with your project. One of our clients, we've done 3 journey mapping initiatives with them. Finally, the third one, they brought HR and they told me they were glad they did, but it took 2 projects to get them there. But as you can tell by looking at this, far too often the teams are kept small, but that's the number one best practice. Customer experience is a team sport. You need to bring the whole team to the journey mapping. That's the first best practice. The second one is that magic happens at the intersection of customers and employees. Now, I know you believe that in your customer experience because if you are a multi-location organization, for example, you know that your server in this example your people out at the stores, they're the magic of your experience. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about instead is that there's too much of a belief that either A, we don't involve customers in journey mapping, which is just daft. It's the second best practice. Or that it's a market research activity. So let's have a vendor go out and talk to our customers and tell us what they found. Both of those are horrible practices. And that's coming from a journey mapping vendor. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's go back to change management and look at the ADKAR model, which is the most common change management model. It's developed by ProSci and has 5 steps. In order to drive change, people need to be A, aware of the need to change, D, desire to change, K, know what to change, A, be able to change, and R, reinforce the change afterwards. Odds are, if you're looking at journey mapping, you are aware that you need to change and you desire to change. That's why you're investing 45 minutes with us. The journey map will cover the K, the knowledge of what to change. But just because you're here doesn't mean that your peers are aware of the need to change and desire to change. So the first thing is about the magic of the intersection of employees and customers is getting the employees part of the process and getting them out to talk to customers firsthand. Now, your retail or your field employees probably don't need to do that. They're doing that every day. But I guarantee your IT team isn't. When they hear firsthand what customers have to say, that's when change starts to happen. So getting your employees involved so they hear it firsthand, so they really own the results. The second problem with many journey mapping initiatives is that people think that it's a workshop. You get your teams together, you have them take on the role of a customer, and you map them out and post-it notes, and bam, you have a journey map. Well, here's the bad news. The kind of thinking that led to your loyalty issues, maybe your small basket size or lack of repeat customers, whatever drove you to be part of today's webinar, that type of thinking that led to the problem that you're having doesn't magically get better just by adding post-it notes. We do hypothesis mapping, which is what we call when employees get inside of a room and predict the answer. We do that in the first part of our process, and it's about 70% correct. But what's missing is what we'll talk about next, the moments of truth. Those are commonly wrong. Your teams don't understand what's most important to customers. And so even though Post-it notes are a good Minnesota company, they're just down the road, they're wonderful. I love Post-it notes. I have a bunch of them in my office. The magic's not in the Post-it notes. The magic happens at the intersection between your corporate employees and your customers when they hear firsthand what's happening. And that's the second best practice. You need to put that customer into your customer journey map. That's what's critical for change. So again, the first best practice was involve a broad cross-functional team, or customer experience is a team sport. The second is the magic happens at the intersection of employees and customers. Get your corporate employees out and involve customers and get them together to hear firsthand what's happening. Our third best practice is that you win or lose customers at your moments of truth. Not every moment matters the same. There's a great white paper came out 2 weeks ago from Customer Think, where they looked at winning versus developing customer experience programs and found that the developing programs are more likely to fix touch points. Winning programs are more likely to recreate the experience for an emotional outcome by looking at those moments of truth, and they involve emotions. The Temcrum group found that when the emotional experience is rated highly, 76% of your customers are promoters. When it's rated low, only 6% are. And when problems happen, and problems will happen, they found that 63% of the time, they'll forgive you if they have a positive emotional experience. If they don't, only 11% of the time will they forgive you when there's a problem. And again, problems will happen in any experience. So we're going to introduce a second poll here. This is coming from the book, The Power of Moments, using Forrester data. And Forrester measures customer experience in a 7-point scale. I want you to tell me, where do you focus your efforts? What do you think is most important to get business outcomes? In a 7-point scale, do you want to take the people who give a 1 to a 3 and drive them to a 4, 5, or 6? Or do you want to take the people who give a 4, 5, or 6 or drive them to a 7? What will create the most business impact? Again, focus on people who give you a 1 to 3 to move them up, eliminate the negatives, or to get people who are a 4, 5, or 6 and move them to a 7 and elevate the positives. What will give you the most organizational value? All right. Yes. Good answer. Good prediction here. This is what Forrester found. If we go back here, most of you said 4 to 6, and that's fantastic. And I probably gave it away with some of my talking here. So let's go back there. Yes, that we found that 80% of effort of organizations actually focused on eliminating the negatives. But elevating the positives is 9 times as valuable. And so one of the ways of doing that is building a moment of delight. As I mentioned, winning customer experience programs don't fix pain points. They recreate the experience for emotional outcome. And the book, The Power of Moments, they talked about creating a moment of delight, and that it has at least 1 of 4 elements. It elevates above the everyday, it rewires our understanding of ourselves and the world, it captures at our best, or a social. So when you're looking at your experience, look for opportunities to create these 4 moments. And then, once you know what your moments of truth are, your moments of delight, you've captured, these are the most important moments. And it's usually, by the way, 2 to 4. I used to teach at the University of Minnesota, and a student brought a map from a major manufacturer, you'd know them, who said they had 9 moments of truth. Interestingly enough, there were only 9 steps of the journey. You can't win at 9 times. That takes too many resources. You have to find your most critical times and focus on them. And once you've done that, then build your measurement around that. Now, you could ask surveys for every step of your journey, and you could put a dashboard included every step of the journey, and you'll annoy your customers and confuse your employees. Instead, learn what your critical moments of truth are and measure how you're doing against those, because those are your best opportunities to win loyalty. So again, our first key practice for a world-class journey mapping program is that customer experience is a team sport. Involve your whole team. The second is that the magic happens at the intersection of customers and employees. And the third is that you win or lose at your moments of truth. So let's go back to Bob and Andrea. What was their experience like? Well, they involved broad cross-functional team. They chose 4 locations, 2 with high loyalty and 2 with low, in order to do the journey mapping. So they could really target the results for a couple locations and filter out a lot of noise. They involved 4 representatives from each of the locations, that's 16, and added in about a dozen corporate employees into the team to learn firsthand, to first of all predict what we're going to learn, what we call a hypothesis map, and then to follow along the journey. We gave participants a smartphone app, so they came into the why, they'd take a picture of the why, they would tell us, today I'm going to use cardio, I'm going to use the locker room, and I'm going to use the pool, or whatever it was. We'd ask them to rate that experience on a 5-point scale, and if it wasn't a 5, we'd tell them, I'd ask them why wasn't it, and tell us why, and record a video of their experience as they go throughout. We then held focus groups, which we don't normally do unless it's as a secondary methodology like this is, to hear more detail about that, and we involved the team to watch the journey as it happened to the smartphone app. That's second best practice. The magic happens at the intersection of customers and employees. And with that, they identified 3 different personas, and the personas varied by what they're trying to accomplish. You can see Carly here is focused on classes, class-focused Carly. It could also be Carl, but most were women, and loved that. And her big moment of truth was that instructor. And she would actually follow that instructor to many different YMCA locations, wherever that instructor was teaching. We have Mandy, the mom, or Daniel, the dad. And what differentiated them from Carly could have kids too. Carly used to be an athlete often, not always, probably joined another club before this. Mandy never has, or Daniel. And so they don't know what the why is about. They're there for their kids. And so that same list of 100 classes that Carly loved, her moment of truth, was a negative moment of truth for Mandy because she was overwhelmed. But what was very positive was that greeting, or the why greeted her kids by name. That made Mandy and Daniel, they loved it. That was their moment of truth. But that same moment of truth for Mandy and Daniel, that greeting where they called the kids by name, didn't resonate for the third person, which is heads down Haley or Harrison. If you've ever seen somebody who comes into the workout location with their headphones already in, runs to hello and goes straight to the workout, that's Harrison or Haley. And for them, the challenge was the YMCA is all about community. Harrison and Haley don't want community, at least not as is typically represented. They're there for themselves. They may have kids. The goal of the Y, as far as the kids go, is to take the kids away so they can do their workout. But you do notice this wellness consultation, and we don't have time to go into all the details. You can read it in that Quirks article, was a big positive moment of truth for them because it challenged the way they work out. It helped them learn more about themselves. So this offering, which you can see from the colors here, wasn't so positive for the other two personas, really made a big difference for Harrison, and they were able to win at those moments of truth. So there's a little bit about the why and how they're now using measurement to track these moments of truth. I'm going to turn it on back to the team, where we're going to talk a little bit more detail about how you can do some of this work.
Thanks, Jim. The difference between journey mapping and journey measurement really resonates. At Intouch, we developed journey map dashboards for our customers so that they could connect data points to different touch points in the journey and easily identify what actions they need to take to make improvements to the customer experience. Some of our customers use these dashboards after completely mapping out their customer journey, and some use them just to focus on those key moments that matter. Next, we're going to hear from our marketing director, Lindsay Sykes, who will share a couple of practical examples of how our customers are using these journey map dashboards and the impact that it's had on their business. Over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Alyssa. Hi, everyone. Today, I'm going to share 2 customer success stories with you. Since we're limited on time, I'm going to try and fit in as much information as I can, but keep them high level. So the first story I'm going to share with you is about our customer that's a popular coffee chain with over 200 locations in the United States. Although this coffee brand has many different touch points and customer journeys, their operations team focuses on measuring 2 customer journeys and a few key touch points or moments that matter. And they chose these moments that matter based on how much these areas impact their brand promise. They measure the journeys of customers that drive through and walk in. And the touch points that they measure are arrival, placing an order, payment, wait time, and receiving the order. So this fast-growing coffee chain uses Intouch Insight's mobile forms software to ensure they uphold their operational standards and deliver consistent, exceptional customer experiences as they expand with new locations. They use mobile checklists to measure things like compliance with opening and closing procedures and operational processes, and to evaluate employee training and behavior during on-site visits. All of the data from the brand's operational checklists and on-site visits is mapped to the specific touch points in the customer journey and displayed on journey map dashboards within the Intouch reporting platform. And I'll show you an example of what one of these dashboards looks like in just a minute. The coffee chain also uses Intouch surveys to collect customer feedback and measure customer satisfaction. And they integrate data from their point of sale system within the Intouch platform as well, so they can combine it with their checklist and survey data to understand how it correlates to sales and customer satisfaction metrics. So any data integrated within the Intouch platform can be mapped to different touch points in the customer journey, and then can be included in journey map dashboards. This makes it easy to identify which areas of the journey need to be improved, and they can also see that at different locations. An example of one of their key findings was that during the drive-through journey, locations that were identified to have an average drive-through wait time of over 2 minutes during on-site evaluations also had lower overall customer satisfaction scores. So after interpreting this data, they made a plan of action and they were able to reduce the drive-through times at these locations and improve overall on-site evaluation scores by 12% in 2 months. So the next example I'm going to share with you is our customer that is a restaurant chain with over 100 locations across the United States. Their goal is to make delicious home-style food served by friendly people. They believe that in order to do so, each frontline employee must demonstrate specific teamwork behavior. So the restaurant chain has detailed standards and processes its employees are trained to follow. When choosing which touch points they wanted to measure the performance of, they decided to focus on touch points in the journey that lined up with their operational and service standards that they had already created. The touch points that they measure are research, arrival and parking, greeting, service and dining, restrooms, and payment. So this customer also uses Intouch Insight's mobile form software, and they use it to complete daily checklists and perform monthly audits to evaluate operational performance and ensure frontline staff are following procedures and demonstrating specific teamwork behavior. Each audit and checklist has sections with questions that relate to specific touch points in the customer journey. All results are submitted in real time and displayed on Journey Map dashboards so that the restaurant can easily identify which touch points need to be improved. This restaurant chain gets a lot of families that visit while they're traveling, and since online reviews like TripAdvisor and Yelp play such a big role in a customer's decision to select a restaurant when they're doing research on the road, this chain wanted to pull in online review data to understand what customers see during the research phase of the journey and if there were any correlations to its operational performance. So an example of one of their key findings was locations that achieved an overall score of less than 85% on the teamwork section of their on-site evaluation also scored poorly in the service and dining section and received lower Yelp scores. So to address the issue, the restaurant chain focused on improving training at those locations and increased their monthly audit that evaluates operational performance and frontline teamwork behavior until they achieved the desired results. So I know that was a lot of information, and we're happy to talk to anyone a little bit more about this after if you have some more questions. I hope you enjoy learning a little bit more about how Journey Map dashboards can help support your CX measurement efforts and how they can make it easy to prioritize where improvements need to be made in the customer journey. And with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Alyssa, for the Q&A.
Great, thanks so much, Lindsay. So as Lindsay mentioned, we're gonna head into our Q&A portion. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and ask your questions in the question box and we'll start going through them. So my first—
Bringing that up, I just want to comment on what Lindsay's talking about there. I love that story there where the teamwork, which is something that might not be seen as customer facing, caused several different outcomes that were non-optimal. And it's something that wouldn't often be thought of, yet is a really powerful finding. And that's a great story right there of how it went beyond the intuitive to really show that teamwork of your employees has a huge outcome in your customer experience. I love that story.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, Jim, so I have a question for you from Samuel. How do you determine the level of granularity or scope needed in a customer journey? And how do you choose where to start and where to end a journey?
Samuel, that's a great question. In fact, we could spend probably a webinar just on that question by itself. And it's something we actually spend 2 chapters on in the book. It comes back to what's your business problem or opportunity. And just to give you a very quick answer, it tends to be one of 3. Something's broken. For example, if we knew that the researching for the restaurant was broken, you would focus it very granularly on that problem. And that's the most common of the 3. Second, we are doing something new. For example, maybe you're going to move into a new market, using that restaurant example. So you want to understand how people in that market shop for whatever you're looking for. So you're already going to do something, you want to use a map to inform it. The granularity is determined by that business opportunity you're going after. The third is that there's a new leadership or customer experience capability coming in. And that tends to be on a broader side. And you're looking then the map to be a high-level diagnostic. That white paper reference that came out a couple of weeks ago from Customer Think looked at those winning programs and found that winning programs were most likely to have begun with a broad end-to-end map and then to have done follow-up mapping exercises based on the problems discovered there. Our own research showed that the average number of journeys mapped were 2.5. So a long way of not answering your question, Samuel, it depends on the business problem you're going after, but the best programs will do both a broad map and then specific maps inside of that once they learn what the problems are.
Great answer. Thanks, Jim. I've got another one for you from Kieran, who says, if there's no existing NPS or CSAT data, how can we perform a journey map? Do we approach a sample set of customers by segment and do a journey mapping workshop, or should we establish a VOC process and collect the data from customers?
Great question. Often a journey map is used to help formulate the overall VOC strategy. And so what we'll do is we'll first get your teams involved to predict what they think the customers will say. And then most often a journey map is done through qualitative research first, then optionally quantitative afterwards. But you follow the customers as they go through the journey. Now that's in a short journey, you can literally do that with a smartphone app or others. For a longer journey, you'll talk to customers at different phases of that to understand what they're going through and use that to build your map. That map is then often used to create your journey dashboards we saw there, as well as to create your overall VOC strategy. In fact, we had one client whose first journey map was to understand how customers bought, very narrow. The second one is to understand how customers use their software, fairly narrow. But the third was actually to go back and say, okay, we want to build a survey approach. Where are all the places we need to build the surveys? And so they use a broad map to say, here's how we need to build our VOC.
Fantastic, thank you. Lindsay, I've got a question for you from George, who says, is there a limit to the number of touch points that could be included in a journey map?
Great question. So there is no limit, but as we've heard from Jim throughout the webinar and the examples that we gave, typically what our customers like to do is just focus on those key moments that matter and those key touch points. So it can be a little bit overwhelming to see all of those different touch points, but it is possible if it is something that you'd want to do.
Great, thank you. Jim, John is asking, is it best to create the journey map as best you can with cross-functional teams and then vet it with the customer, or do you do it with the customer first and vet it with internal teams?
Great. As far as the change management goes, the biggest risk of any research project is we already knew that. So what we do is we'll get the teams first to predict what they think the journey is going to look like. But then I want to be careful. What some firms do, and this is a terrible practice, is show that assumptive map or hypothesis map to customers and say, did we get it right? Awful idea, because you've now anchored them on your guesses. Instead, what you do is keep that in your back pocket, use it to guide your discussion, but to let your customers tell you what the journey is on their own. Then bring that back to the teams and say, okay, this is what you thought, this is what the customers actually said. Now what do we do about it?
Great, and sort of a follow-up to that from Claudia, who asks, what is the best methodology to identify what are the right moments of truth from the customer's perspective?
Qualitative research. Now that varies. The most common, so first of all, focus groups on their own, not good journey mapping methodology. You want to follow customers as they go through the journey. The most common ways we do that are if it's a short journey and it's a consumer, we'll do those smartphone apps, what we call a digital ethnography or a diary study. So customers can tell you about the journey as it's actually happening. We've done that for retail shoppers. We've done that for all kinds of different groups. If it's a longer journey, then we'll do in-home or in-business interviews where we're actually at the customer's site. We'll bring our clients with us so they hear firsthand about the journey from the client. But it's always qualitative research first that may have a quantitative follow-up.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ida asks, what should the balance between frontline staff and corporate staff look like?
That depends a little bit the size or type of organization, but if we follow along for the examples of a retailer, a restaurant, a multi-location, you're typically going to want about half and half. I mentioned the YMCA, theirs is about 60% from the field, but you want those key critical corporate employees as well, because they're often the ones who are going to create the change. You want the field to get that voice of the field as part of it, and because the field won't believe it if they don't see field people are part of it, but you want enough corporate people who can actually carry forth and drive the change. So around half.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Let's see. I've got one from Gulam who asks, how do you suggest that folks start mapping their customers' journeys?
The first thing we do is look for a business problem. It's going to take a lot of resources to map it right. And so you want to make certain that you are solving a business problem. We were working with a health insurance company last week, and we talked about the research about how the most effective programs have a broad map. And the team was really excited about that until the senior sponsor said, look, I'm on the hook for this. If I go spend $100,000 and all we do is get a high level map saying here where the problems are, but we don't have enough information to fix it, I'm going to look awful. We need to fix a problem with our journey map. And once we have established credibility, then we can come back and look at the end to end. So I always recommend start with the business problem, because that will determine the first 3 of the 5 journey mapping questions. What's a business problem? What's the right journey? And who's the right customer? It also influences the next 2, which is what's the right approach to getting the customer's voice and who's on the team.
Great, thank you. Samuel has a follow-up question to the comment you just made, which is, how do you reconcile starting with a business problem, but trying to focus on what we do well already and creating differentiating experiences? So can a single journey map be used to accomplish both?
It can be, but it's going after if the business problem is improving loyalty. What you want to do is you want to look at ways, what are the causes of loyalty problems? And just to speak frankly, rarely is that the area you're doing well. Yes, I recognize the research says you want to create great experiences, but what I would say is focus those great experiences on the areas you might be weak right now, or within that journey, there may be specific moments that you're strong that you can elevate even further. So I'm kind of talking about it both sides of my mouth. The business problem is where you need to start, but within there, odds are you're not doing everything badly. So find those steps within that journey where you're doing well and look at how you can do that even better or better link it to the customer's needs.
Great, thanks. I think we have time for one more question. So I have a question from Christy who asks, what is your opinion of combining a journey mapping effort with a service blueprinting and just using one map?
I liken to the last part you put in there. Journey mapping is a great input into service blueprinting. Journey map is typically current state. Service blueprint is what you're looking at for future state or a journey blueprint. And so I like to use the journey map to show where you are today and then start quickly elevating to future state. In fact, again, we look at that white paper on winning versus developing programs. We find the winning programs are far more likely to have built a vision for an end-to-end future state. And a blueprint is a great way of doing that.
Great, thanks, Jim. So I'm going to say we're just about out of time for questions. So thank you very much to everybody who submitted your questions. Thanks again, Jim, for leading the webinar today. We really do appreciate you joining us. If anyone's interested in talking with our team of experts about how you can collect and combine feedback and operational data using journey map dashboards to improve your customer experience, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks, everyone, and have a great day.